So yes, we're moving into the time zone of Central European time. So we have Simone Moore as our next keynote. So Simone, I've known Simone. She's been my friend for many years now. It's been quite some time. I'm not quite sure how many years. She can probably tell me. But anyway, she is recognised as in the top 25 industry thought leaders. She's the editorial director of the Era of Humanising IT docu-series. She's a contributing author to Verism Unwrapped and Applied, and also ITIL 4 High Velocity IT, which is pretty awesome. She's apparently a mixologist, which to me is something that mixes cocktails, someone who mixes cocktails. But this is probably appropriate because what she does is blending business and technology approaches and frameworks. So, and helping people on their digital journeys, through organisations and as individuals. And she's very much in the face of humanising IT today. So, and that's actually what her keynote's about. It's called Humanising the Next Normal, I believe. And I might now switch over to say hello to Simone and get her to take it away.
Well, good morning, Catherine. I know it's your afternoon, but it's certainly still quite early and dark here in the southwest of France. Now, you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Excellent. I'm just going to share my screen and make sure that that's come up for you okay. How's that?
Yes, good? That's fine. Looks good. Yes.
Excellent. Wonderful. It's always good when technology works the way you expect it to, isn't it?
Yes. Well, you'd like people to confirm that they can see.
Exactly. Wow. Yes, it's early, it's dark, it's here in the southwest of France, but I can tell you just by looking at the front slide I've got here, this little Aussie is definitely dreaming of when summer comes again. And what's really interesting for me is that not very far from here, we have quite a lot of fields of sunflowers, and I'm looking forward to seeing them come along. Talk about follow the sun. It's part of the reason why I've actually chosen to quote Paolo here, that let's face it, we can't really go back. We only have to worry about the best way of moving forward. It's really about the foundation of our future, I guess. What are we building right now? Where are we taking this? I think the standards to which we call something normal don't quite fit anymore. It's really about just not so much the new as well. It's really about the next. I think if we can stop calling something new all the time, there are new things, but new for some people can be uncomfortable. Rather, if we say, okay, what's the next thing? That's really the premise around thinking about how do we bring the human back into it a little more. Just for myself, Catherine mentioned I've known you guys for itSMF for quite a long time. I think the original meeting might have been back somewhere in 2005, perhaps. Maybe a little bit earlier, not quite sure. But really, one of the wonderful things about what the organisation does and what we're able to do with each other in member groups is really explore what we're doing together. I wouldn't say that I'm particularly clever, but definitely very curious. That's what's kept me going this whole time through my career. And what am I doing next? What is the next thing that we can work on? And part of that, though, are very core principles on which I always work. And that's around our people. How do we connect people? And in doing so, we're able to then share our knowledge. And how are we going to go about doing that? And through the sharing of our knowledge, we're able to discover all the different possibilities. This is the thing, what is actually possible? And once we understand that, then we can work towards realizing our potential. Really and actually enjoyed watching Bart doing his exercises there and thinking, no, it's still too early. But it's really good for us to, what is our potential? How far can we move? Under what time frame might this happen? So that's part of what I like to do in terms of focusing on my principles. And talk about a journey. Wow, I really began my love affair with technology a very long time ago, and it did actually start with learning to type on a manual typewriter. And moving into the military, I then moved into communications. So started to work on the telex machines and satellites, etc., and so on. Murray code and Morse code and all sorts of interesting things. The way in which we can connect and the way in which we can share our knowledge that way. Harnessing what technology was possible. So moving into other organizations, especially telecommunications, being able to explore that further, the way communications came together with the computing in a very deep way. Finally moving out onto my own, as you can see the feet here, as long as I had somewhere to plug in, I was okay. Even now with the way we work, we don't necessarily have to be physically plugged in. As long as we have our battery power, I can sit anywhere and work from anywhere. And from that point and moving onwards, working with all these different organizations in different states of their journey, I am even more fascinated by what I now call machine humanity or humanizing IT. It's a very fascinating area. And even more fascinating, I guess, is the fact how far have humans come along with the technology, or is the technology gone ahead of us, or how are we actually starting to think about where we are? And I think at this moment, we're starting to rediscover our humanity. So just a little bit on our journey today, just going to put a little bit of context around where this information sits and looking at how we're going to shift that dynamic and become more resilient, I think. And there'll be time for Q&A, I'm sure. So the other thing too is no matter how far I roam, I still call Australia home. That is my pantry. So I think that we have things that no matter where we go, there are things that make us feel comfortable and the things that we like to have to remind us of who we are and where we are and what that means to us. And I'm so glad that I have enough to last me for some time because it's a bit hard to get some care packages at the moment. All right, so into the context of how we're rediscovering our humanity and what's happening with technology. I think the immediacy of change at the moment, the velocity at which it occurs, can kind of leave us reeling. There are things that appear abruptly. They can be quite unexpected and leave slightly out of kilter, I think. For some, it completely overwhelms them. And this year, the context in which we're sitting now has certainly accelerated the need for organisations to let's say, be further along the path than what they originally planned, or even for those that weren't expecting to do it for another 2 or 3 years, they've had to be thrown into the maelstrom of it straight away. So we know that there are definitely new business models, new engagement models. People are looking to exploit the technology so that they can get further ahead, and certainly the speed to market for the products and services, but it's been very much more about how they've gotten their capability together at this point. Certainly accelerating the digital age has definitely come about. There's this, what is this promise of what it's going to do for us and how that's going to do it? We still have a lot of complications in place. We still have the silos. There are still competing interests within an organization itself. There are so many different management approaches, and certainly too, there has been, in some cases, I still see it, a lack of organization agility. This if we want successful digital transformation, we have to remember it's not so much technology-driven endeavor. We've definitely got to look at how are we using this to help us make decisions. First and foremost, it's definitely a cultural and organization transformation. And look, what we're doing is bringing math and the computational side of things. It's very messy, but all of this stuff is value laden by human stuff. It's not always objective, and let's face it, human affairs are quite a complex thing at times, and that's actually invading the technology algorithms that we're working towards. So that's another reason then why it's important to look at blending our frameworks, and we want to understand, I guess, what is going to be the experience that we're going to have. Something that's really come to the fore, and this is just something normal. If something has a really big impact, we pay attention to it. So there's been a lot of things that we have been ignoring until that the context of what we're in has forced us to look at it very hard and very fast. And only then have a lot of organizations given the commitment that's needed, or I should say the depth of commitment to improving what's happening. So remember what we call that outcome economy. People have come more back to, well, what's the experience that I'm having around this? There are some things that haven't changed. The difficulty, as I said, is that this particular conversation you see coming up on the screen is still happening. Now, there's a number of reasons. If we have a really resilient organization, that doesn't mean that they don't do testing. That doesn't mean that they're not focused on the right things and how they go about doing the work. But if we're to actually put in place anytime, anywhere, any space, any place, then we need to make sure that we've built that into the way in which we're working, so that if and when those issues occur, that we're actually able to recover in the right way, that we're still sustainable, that we're still able to provide our people with the right things. That includes not just the customer itself, but those that are also supporting those products and services. So if you were to do a quick snapshot on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your organization over these 4 areas? Now, this is part of the digital readiness framework, definitely worth having a look at from the Institute for Digital Transformation. Now, this is just the 4 key areas that they look at, but just have a high-level look at the questions. Are you operating from a stable base? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're cast in stone. Your foundation can still be very fluid. The key is, what are you operating from? How sustainable is that? How quickly then can your organization react to change? From a strategic level, how well does your organization anticipate change? Now, that may seem like a strange question given what we've been through this year. We cannot anticipate every kind of change, but given the way we can react to change, those things come in combination as well. So even if we only see something come around the corner very fast, how agile are we in being able to maneuver? That's definitely a key thing. So, and also to how receptive an organization is to implementing a change. This is very, very much based on the digital technology is our catalyst. It is not necessarily the specific reason, just because we have the technology available to us now that we might not have had a week ago, does that mean that we need to use it or should be using it? We still have that strategy question to ask. So think about having a look at the readiness framework and really understanding, what are you working from? What's our capability? This blending the perfect balance, yes, I am a bit of a mixologist. I really miss the traveling, because everywhere I went, it's an opportunity to catch up with our colleagues and be able to chat with things. I really do miss being able to do that. But one of the things I was always looking for is the perfect margarita. It's a very simple drink. There's very few ingredients, but it can be very easily, let's say, not to the flavor or to the texture that you might expect. And the reason is even with simple ingredients, what can happen for us is that it could be too much leaning in one particular area and not enough in another. We can be, again, out of balance, out of kilter. And so as we're trying to sip something, it can be, oh, okay, wasn't quite expecting it to be that way. Or we could actually sit back and relax into it. And so if I was to show you, and this isn't even all of them, these frameworks that are on the screen right now, they are not all IT service management frameworks. There are some HR ones in here, there's some finance ones in here. But if you were to look at some of these, how many of these exist within your organization right now? If you were to talk to your colleagues in the other areas of the organization, sales and marketing, what approaches are they using? What are the techniques and methods that they have in their toolbox? And have a look at how many of them do interact with each other, how many of them might actually be similar, or where is the gap between those particular frameworks. There's very much a lot of the guiding principles are common across all of them. And you will find that although the wording might be different, that they do support each other. And you're also going to find whether you are making it too difficult because you've got extra effort, extra work, extra focus going on here. It will really help you know exactly the sort of methods and techniques that is already existing, and making sure then that you can start creating what is the unique cocktail that works for your organization. How are all these things going to work together? Very much important to think about blending those management practices. But underlying all of that takes relationship agility. If we want to have that management commitment, if we want to get that reinforcement and sponsorship and investment that we need, if we want to make a cultural change, if there are structural changes to occur, we already know tooling and automation that can be quite expensive. The emerging technology market. If we want to ensure that we've got trust and collaboration, then we have to focus on our relationships. And when we take that then through what people are going to experience, what is that journey that you're going to take me through? We're looking at conversational UI. We're talking at conversational AI. How are we going to communicate with each other? Through what? How many channels are going to be open to us? What kind of things do I need to learn? Are there different skill sets? Is this easy? Is it not? So just from the basic human need to communicate is a very strong focus for that very front up relationship that we're going to be having. But underneath that, there's got to be the knowledge. How are you going to capture, structure, and reuse that knowledge? And that knowledge comes about the humans as much as it does about the technology. This is where, too, that we're starting to look at things rather than just knowledge as knowledge articles that we need, the how-tos. The knowledge goes further. It's getting built into the business as a strategy, that the knowledge practices are something that goes across the whole organization. Service desk is not the only place we need knowledge. IT is not the only place we need and use knowledge. There are many things that are known in other areas that we need. And then building that into our day-to-day workflow, it's not in addition to what we do. It actually becomes the way in which we work. In fact, we already use the knowledge. We already practice the knowledge. It's just finding the better way of doing it so it becomes part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. only then, only when we can understand what we're doing and how we're doing it as part of the workflow, can we start to look at how that's integrated and automated. We already know that automating a bad process just makes us do the wrong thing faster. So if we get that wrong, how are we going to teach AI? How are we going to have the artificial intelligence know what it's doing? What are those algorithms I was talking about earlier? How is it going to keep improving? How are we going to ensure that those things take place? That means understanding what our rates of change are, understanding how complex something is, or what's the meaning and the purpose behind something. If we're unclear about the present, how are we going to move further into the future? So very important that we start understanding how much do we know about a situation and how well are we able to predict what's going to come out of that. There are lots of things stored in our algorithms that are drawing dynamic conclusions about what's going on. So we want to define exactly what's happening. We need to understand the triggers that activate and what are the consequences as a result of going through the actions. We need to consider what systems we're going to automate and what systems we keep human. I think that's really critical because we could automate lots of things, but do we want to? Do we need to? How are we going to keep those interactions happening? So get very clear about how the business works internally and across the whole enterprise and how one change actually impacts another. In terms of the complexity, as AI gets more human-like, what are the disorders that are going to creep in? What are the decision-making processes? Who decides the human level? In the complexity, we need to simplify as much as possible. The thing is that there are things that are complex, and we need to understand what things can we reuse, what things can we are multi-purpose, instead of just designing everything to work on one thing. We need to understand how those interactions are going to occur and test them, play with them, and figure it out. And as we use all the different approaches that we have there, take that into being able to clarify what's happening. So when we get in a design approach, we want it to amplify the best of the automation and the best of the humanity that exists with it. We want to get clear about the meaning behind what we're doing. I think that's really important. And to do that, it means that we've got to communicate. That hasn't changed. There are certain parts of the human side of us that, well, that's just who we are. One of my favorite people, being a long-time mentor and friend, Ivor McFarlane, has a wonderful saying: innovation starts with disobedience. We haven't always engendered this sense of, I guess, disobedience within our people, but really it means if I asked you to build me a sandcastle, most people would imagine this. I guess, especially for us beachgoers, it was always fun. We can always just get the bucket and pail, throw the sand in, and there we go. But who said it had to look like that? There was a trip I did a long time ago to Bora Bora. And I was watching this 5-year-old boy on the beach, and this is what he made. Now, this is where things start to become contextual. He's French. This is actually what he built. This was his idea of a sandcastle, or a ruined fort, if you like. Then as technology and as bits and pieces come along, look, we can add things. We've got, with our sticks and shells. What are those additional pieces that, well, I can actually make something else now because I've got something available to me? And who said a sandcastle had to look like a castle that we might imagine from medieval times? Who's to say I can't modernize it and build something better or just different and make something stronger? So when you think about what you're doing, are we doing things in new ways or are we doing new things? Everyone wants quicker, faster, cheaper, greener, easier. That will always be there. But are we doing the old things differently? Are we doing things we couldn't manage before because we've now got new things? Or are you starting to move into doing things that you hadn't been able to imagine before? That's pretty interesting stuff. So you are building your sandcastle. If you could build your sandcastle, what would it look like? How are you going to go about doing that? And that means balancing the interactions as we do it. Systems make it possible, but people make it happen. So if we're going to have healthy, meaningful relationships with those around us, if we're going to explore all these pathways, then we need to understand that there's three core interactions that we have to balance. People's interactions with technology, people's interactions with process, and the interactions of people to people. And this is how we wish it is. This is what we see in a lot of the diagrams. This is what we see in a lot of the models that are given to us in the business models. We need culture, we need trust, we need collaboration, and we need fast feedback loops. There are a lot of things packed into those circles, and there's supposed to be this nice, even flow. Well, it is wishful thinking. The reality of the experience is that never in the history of calm down has anyone calmed down by being told to calm down. The reality of our experience is that we are always hitting, first of all, our energy levels. We're either in low or high energy, and we're in positive or negative emotions. So when we go in for our work day, really what happens from the morning, we can start off high, but then I'm moving on to the other side because where's my coffee? Then I could be saying, oh, I'm a bit low on energy, I need some lunch, but so on and so forth. And since we are towards the end of your incredible day, you'll find that the top right hand corner, wish it was actually in the same room, but you will end up having your sessions with your mates at the end of the day. So this is the reality of our experience. We're constantly moving in and out of how we're thinking and feeling, and that impacts our interactions on a huge level. The human nervous system is our information highway. So what we actually have here in our central nervous system and peripheral nervous system is a communication system that's going on. Every time we feel something different, we look at something, we're impacted by something, our brain decides, well, I'm going to release a few different chemicals here to respond in the way that you're reacting. For all our tech heads in the room, your brain is your server room, there's your WAN, and there's your LAN. So the human has around 60,000 thoughts in a day. That's a lot of thinking. 95% of that is repetitive, and around 80% of that is negative. And there's a very good reason for it. It's an evolutionary hangover, all right? We still have our fight, flight, freeze response. We still have our crocodile brain to deal with. And then we have our emotional brain and then the thinking brain. So if you look up the triune brain, it'll give you an idea. But that is the process through which we walk ourselves. And for quite good reason. We have a safety factor. That's what's happening. We have a trigger that helps us understand what's going on. So what's happening is our brain is constantly checking in, constantly sending signals to us to say, oh, how are you feeling at the moment? Is everything okay? And a lot of this, of course, is sub-programming, but we're still responding in a particular way. We need to make sense of those sensations, and you can have a similar sensation with the person that you're having conversation, but completely different meanings because we're still coming at them from our own context. So something that is being pegged more closely now, and you'll find that it's talked about a lot in the C-level magazines as well, is tapping into what we call flow science. Energy flows where attention goes. Part of flow science is really understanding how well we can perform the productivity levels that we have. Getting into a flow state is really about being completely immersed in the experience that we're having. It's about being right in the zone. We would have heard that term before, in the zone with what's going on. And if you want to look at more details around flow science, you can hook into the Flow Genome Project and look into that a little bit deeper. It's really interesting stuff. But how do you get into your zone? When you're out, when you're not quite there, how are you going to move into it? But a really important factor is that we can't live in the zone full time. We have what we call a cycle of wear and tear and rest and repair. As we're wearing and moving into that, we've got that struggle that we're getting into. We release what we've got and we flow into that zone. But it's also important too that we don't live there, because that's sometimes if you're operating at that level all the time and it's going and going, you will crash and burn if we don't release afterwards. We get tired, we have to recharge, we've got to recover. So really think about that. It makes a difference. And if you look at the experience level metrics, you would have heard talk about what is the experience of the customer, the experience of the employees, how are we going to measure that? And you can look at companies like Happy Signals that help you understand how to measure that. There's a happiness level and a productivity level. And where is the balance? Where are we weighted? How does that work together so that we can make sure that we have the best experience possible? So understanding what that flow is from our base through to the intensity level of it, what we're really actually wanting to move through as we go through those cycles is to get to that feeling, that afterglow effect, that feeling of trust, that desire, I guess, is for that social bonding. This is where we build and cement that relationship with our customer when they have that experience, and our relationships with our colleagues and the relationship we have with our suppliers, that feeling of fulfillment that we've got there. So as we move through that cycle and in the flow, you will sense all these different things, become more consciously aware of them. And that's where we come into shifting the dynamic. Once we've understood the context of all of that, we can start looking in at what's possible. Emotion AI, I decided to have a little experiment with Siri, and I asked Siri a few different questions. One of them was, I'm not feeling very happy today. And Siri came back with, I don't understand, I'm not feeling happy today, but I could search the web for it. I thought, oh, okay, so I'm not going to have that kind of conversation, obviously, with my AI, or what is meant to be AI in the view of some. It may, I guess, more of a sense that it's possible to have a conversation, but the feeling isn't quite there. I haven't got the human connection I'm looking for. I thought one of the funny was when I said, I'm so frustrated, and she came back and said, fine, stop squeezing me. And I'm thinking, I have no idea where Siri got that information from. So whatever the algorithm was in there, based around if I'm using words like frustrated, one of the other things was says, I don't know what to do. And Siri came back and said, don't worry about it, Simone. And I thought, all right, okay, so I just walk away from it. So it's an interesting experience you can have, but I want you to think about, how are we emoting AI? What is the emotional intelligence that exists with an artificial intelligence? And I don't like the word artificial anyway. If I'm thinking about AI, I'd rather think about actionable intelligence or augmented intelligence, because really that's why we want the technology to do these things, is to augment our current capability. So you can look at organizations like Affectiva. They have been doing some amazing work around the facial recognition of emotions. They are working very closely with other organizations, such as driverless cars, so that the car can actually detect, for example, if there are micro expressions that are occurring that tell it that it's that the driver is actually starting to fall asleep, and that kind of thing. So there's a lot going on around emotion analytics and the way it's being built into technology. If we're expecting to have that experience and the really good interaction, then we need to understand that emotional connection that we're having with the technology. There are other things that you will find. For example, Oliver Appy is wonderful. I've seen some organizations from both HR side as well as call center side tap into the voice recognition. And it's not just voice recognition in terms of security, but how a person's speech is being affected. So we would have heard it. Sometimes we're having a nice conversation with a customer online, and then they start getting frustrated. And as that frustrations build, now, if there is a really good technology that can be my buddy, my AI buddy in support, that can send me a signal, let me know that this person's voice is starting to change, that they are starting to get on a different scale of emotion here, I'm able to then bring a more appropriate response to the interaction as it's developing. So there's a lot of research around that behavioral signal processing and what the techniques that are coming into play with our technology now. But that brings up the conversation of ethics. That was one of my big things in the High Velocity IT and the ITIL 4 book, was looking at what's the ethics around AI. What are we going to do? Now, I will just actually look this up here because I wrote it down quite quickly beforehand. A lot of the information I have around is around in Europe and Canada. But if you look from the Australian perspective at industry.gov.au, these 8 principles is what has come up so far from all the conversation in Australia, in the committees that have come together to look at, okay, if Australia is going to use artificial intelligence, what are the principles on which we're going to base that? And the very first one was the human, social, and environmental well-being, human-centered values. So even think about the technology you have right now in your office, in your work. What are the human values that are actually built into the way in which you work? What are the human values in the way that you design your technology? What are the human values that you have applied in your support teams? There's a lot of questions to be asked around our rights, diversity, the autonomy, the fairness. There's obviously the security and privacy has been around for a long time. Excuse me a moment. We've always been looking for more transparency to explain what has been going on. For AI, we need to be able to contest that if a machine made a decision, how did that impact me? Because if there's a significant negative impact, how do I challenge that? The machine made the decision. It wasn't another human being. How do I argue with a machine? How do I put forward what that actually meant? What kind of accountability is there through the different phases of that AI life cycle? So when I looked at those key area of focuses, if I'm using AI as my initial conversation, then it's accessing the knowledge that it has access to. Does that include what kind of depth of knowledge does it have about me and my interactions? Does that mean then that the process flow that's been automated as a result of that particular knowledge is going to give me the outcome and the experience that is needed, not just wanted, is needed? So do have a good look and see, is what you're doing in your organization, not just in your IT, your organization strategy around technology, does it actually compare well with what's happening in the new committees and I guess policy making? This is policy making. This is part of governance. This is part of risk management. This is part of what are we going to get out of this? What can you afford to lose if it goes wrong is probably a very good question to answer. What is our relationship to that risk? So if these things are going to be built in, one of the key things that's cropped up very recently, I guess, making more aware. It's always been there, but there's a lot more awareness around it now. And that is how we are incorporating empathy into what we're doing. I love the term empathy. The emotion pathway is how we look at it. And it's really about who do we want to be when we grow up, I guess. A lot of people used to say, what do you want to be? A lot of organizations have had to go through a very fast growing up period in the last few months, the acceleration of what they're going through. And I often wonder, what if we missed as a result of that speed? But think of it this way. What's not on LinkedIn? If you were to put up a bunch of photos for yourself, and you must be in each of these photos, if you were going to present a slide to your team, what would be in those photos? How would it describe you as a person? How would they interpret who you are as a result of what they see? Because that's what we do. If we're going to connect with other people, we are assessing all the time what that means. We tend to predict how someone's going to act based on the context that we see them in. Do we only see them as the role that they have in the organization, or are we actually seeing the whole person? Are we bringing the whole person's capabilities? Because quite often when you put up these other photos, what are you doing in them? What are the other skills that we can see that are usable? What is our potential? Because in the role we are in, we may not be using all those other skills, but what are they? As leaders, we need to be really looking and understanding what's possible within our people. Because if we're going to do that whole turn on a dime and move forward fast, then we should understand what the full flow is of our people. And that's also about their well-being. If we're going to build resilience in, we have to have that courage to be imperfect. This comes from the World Economic Forum about ensuring your company has employee well-being. You can see that it's broken down into 4 key areas here. Now, all I've done is just circled a few different things that we've talked a little bit about, even though I haven't necessarily mentioned the words, but psychological safety, personalizing tools. What are our conditions that we are physically in? What kind of metrics at these pivotal moments do we rely on? Because our whole metrics have also shifted. The way we measure, the way we think about how we measure our productivity is also shifted. How are we supporting people through the difficult issues, family, financial decisions, and that kind of stuff? Do we have our local wellbeing champions? And they're just a few things. So we have to make sure that resilience, it's not just a one-off thing. It's not just a workshop. When we're building resilience, it is time and again practicing and applying different approaches and techniques that make us more adaptable, not just flexible. We want to be able to be moving forward, not just come back to where we are. So have a look at things like the Cynefin framework. It also, over its 21 odd years, has actually built and evolved different things. And in the new Cynefin book that's just come out, it's about weaving that sense making and well-being into the fabric of our organizations. So although we might know the Cynefin framework, understanding from the simple to the complicated, complex and chaos, states of being, it really can be applied in any context. We want to actually look at how can we take what we have and repurpose it. I've mentioned that before. Or how are we going to innovate what we're looking at? So really do hone in and have a look at that as one of your approaches and tools that you can apply to the conversations and discussions that need to happen around moving forward. A couple of people already in Cynefin have been looking at things like, well, up the top with complicated and complex, we're looking at the changes like performance management, how career promotions have now shifted. Down in the simple zone, we've got physical and mental health, so our sleeping, our yoga and things like the simple stuff. In the chaotic mode, we might have, yeah?
You need to wrap shortly.
Yes, certainly. I'm almost near the end.
Good.
So, yeah.
Sorry.
So, no, fine. And so in chaotic mode, we might need medical intervention and so on. Have a look at things like the Workplace Empathy State of Report. This is actually just out now, the 2020 Empathy State. 90% of organizations, HR professionals, CEOs know that it's really important, even more important, that companies have to have their mental health programs in place and be more empathetic. The difficulty is that between the CEOs and between employees, there's still quite a large gap as to understanding that link to productivity. Even yesterday, as part of the DevOps Institute, their recent upskilling report has identified empathy as a specific top 10 human skill. So we know that those relationships are required. Be careful, empathy is not one thing. There are different types of empathy. What we're aiming for is the compassionate level, because that's where we're actually taking action to help. It's not just recognizing what someone is going through, what their experience is. It takes it further. It says, okay, what will we do to work with what's happening? So think about how we're reprogramming ourselves and our teams, making sure that we're focusing around not just emotional intelligence as the skill set, but look at the competency of emotional agility. How do we adapt to change? How are we going to move forward in terms of cultivating the self-compassion and acting in accordance with the values that are there, experiencing our full range of emotions and bringing that to the relationships that we're having. So other tools like the Atlas of Emotions, so diving in underneath that, taking more depth and understanding what those things actually mean. When we become more resilient, what we need to do, especially in the way, in the manner in which we're operating. A resilient organization is about creating and adapting its structures, providing the safety, managing those emotional effects, fostering and empowering a diverse workforce, and learning, developing and growing. These things might not sound new, but the way in which we're going about making those things happen has shifted. That dynamic is moved definitely. So humanize the conversations. Don't rely too heavily on talking just about the technology. Make sure that we're building the relationships, our competence, our confidence, the way we connect, and how we are actually contributing to that future. Having the growth mindset and experimenting. You didn't come this far just to come this far. So trust the process that we're starting for. It's okay to what we call resilient dissent. We need adversarial collaboration. We need that for good decision making. We need curiosity. We need to keep asking what's happening, because our conversations, whether it's people to technology, people to process, people to people, it's dynamic, it's shifting, it's splitting. So be comfortable with uncertainty. Otherwise, you won't be able to create the right level of chaos to discover those possibilities, and that will help engender collaboration. So rather than not say the things that you wanted to say and never did, start looking at how we have our nexus, how we have all those lines of relationship between people and between our technology and between our processes. Heart and mind work together. It's not one over the other. That, thank you very much. That was a lot, I'm quite sure. It's very different, Catherine, isn't it? Not being able to see, I can't see people's faces.
Yes, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. No, that's great. So
but,
you're going to hang around and be on the panel. So
I am indeed.
Yes.
I am indeed.
So why don't we cut to South Australia's panel? And